exclusively on Secular Media Network. This is the Gaytheist Manifesto.
Hello and welcome to the Gaytheist Manifesto, your source for news, commentary, discussion, and debate at the intersection of the atheist movement and the LGBT rights movement. I am your host, Callie Wright, and introducing for the very first time my new co-host, Ari Coleman. Ari, welcome.
Yay! Glad to be here.
Awesome. So we've got a really cool show in store today. We are going to be having a very frank, open, and honest discussion about sex and sexuality for queer and transgender people. I have a very cool panel of people put together with different life experiences that bring different perspectives to the table. So we're gonna have a really cool discussion. Should go without saying that there will be very frank discussion of sex and sexuality. If that's not a thing you're comfortable with, maybe want to skip the episode. Don't want to make anyone uncomfortable, but I think it's an important thing to talk about to sort of demystify the lives of queer and trans people. But before we jump into that, I wanted to do a quick intro of our new co-host Ari. So Ari, why don't you just kind of tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your story and why activism is important to you.
Well, where to start? There's a lot of things to cover in that. So I am an atheist. I am transgender, non-binary, pansexual, all sorts of different fun labels applied to me. I was born and raised near Houston, Texas, and then moved to Little Rock, Arkansas when I was 16, lived there for like 7 years, and then just recently moved to Central Illinois with my partner who's getting his master's degree. I don't know. Where do I go from here?
Well, talk to me about why activism is an important thing to you. Why, especially atheist activism, because I feel like sometimes when I tell people in the LGBT community that atheist activism is a thing that's important to me, you kind of get the sideways glance, like, well,
right.
why does that matter? When, queer and trans people are dying and being oppressed, and, why can't you just forget the religious divisions and all of that kind of stuff? So, like, why is that something that's specifically important for you to be involved in?
Well, yeah, like I said, I'm from the South where religion is extremely prevalent. So, I'm not the kind of person who begrudges anyone their own personal beliefs. People are allowed to have different opinions and believe different things. Obviously, I think that, having a religious belief is probably not the correct belief, but, as long as everyone is being respectful and not, trying to push it on other people, I'm totally fine with it. But of course, in the South and in the United States in general as well, it doesn't end up that way. A lot of times, there is a lot of religion getting intermingled into the government. Like I said, I just moved here from Arkansas, and in Arkansas there is definitely a lot of that. For example, there are no protections for workplace discrimination, for example, housing discrimination, healthcare discrimination, anything like that for queer people, and even for, I think, for atheists as well. I'm not entirely sure about that, but it's something that's affected me, not so much me personally, but people that I know and love. And I love everyone because I'm a humanist, so I want everyone to be able to be in a free and open society.
Yeah, that's very true. I don't know about Arkansas necessarily, but friend of the show, Zandy, she's talked a lot about navigating some things in her life. I'm not gonna try and tell her story for her or anything like that, but basically she actually had a judge in a court dismiss something that she was trying to do to get into a safe situation because she was atheist. And I think those things happen far more prevalently than a lot of people think they do, especially in the South.
Right.
So, and of course, when you try and put in those protections for, just basic stuff like employment and healthcare and stuff like that. And what's the number one argument everyone uses? It's always religion, of course.
Yeah, I have yet to hear a good secular argument for being able to discriminate against people because of their sexual orientation or their gender or really anything.
Not a good one. I've heard a few, believe it or not. I've heard a few that masquerade as as logical or empirical, but definitely no good ones.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, cool. Well, Ari, I am super, super excited to have you as part of the show. I think you're super intelligent. You're super well spoken. You've got a good perspective.
Oh no! Don't get into the compliments.
And I'm gonna get sappy, damn it, because that's what I do.
You do it very well.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I am super stoked to have you on the show here. So we're gonna take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be having our panel discussion about sex and sexuality as queer and trans people.
Sexy time.
Yes. More Gay Theist Manifesto right after this.
Hey everybody, this is X.
And I'm Kyle.
And I'm Felicia. We're the Utah Outcasts.
3 out, unashamed, and active atheists living in Utah.
And we are personally inviting you to let us love your ears each and every week.
As we take the news, current events, and pop culture and give it a little twist.
A love twist, with consent.
And we'll be joined each week by a special guest to tell us what makes them an outcast like us.
Come find us.
The Utah Outcasts.
On podhell.com, Stitcher, iTunes, Google Play,
Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube.
And on utahoutcast.com.
We finally bought that domain off the kids handing out mixtapes in the mall.
Come be an outcast with us.
Take care of yourselves out there.
Bonne nuit.
And you're welcome.
Do you know where Saskatchewan is? Probably not. It's in Canada. If you do, you might know a city named Regina. In Regina, there's a studio. And in that studio, there are, at least once a month, a bunch of skeptical atheist geeks and goofballs who get together to do a podcast. We are the Brainstorm Crew, and we're trying to help spread a bit of reason and critical thinking while still having fun. Never taking things too seriously, but still not accepting everything we're told. We go through different topics, exploring them in depth, and often disagreeing. We try to stick to provable facts, and we never trust in myth. That's why we say we're woo-free since 2013. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, or Spreaker under Brainstorm, or check out our website, brainstormblog.net. I can't promise you'll always agree with us, but I can promise you'll have fun listening to us.
Before we jump back into the show, it's time to thank our patrons. Thank you so much for believing in us enough to contribute to us financially and for being a part of this movement. Patrons of the Gay Theist Manifesto have access to all sorts of cool stuff, like a big shout out on the show, premium content, including an audio journal I've decided to keep documenting the more personal stuff I don't dive into on the show, and an exclusive patrons only hangout once a month. If you're so inclined, head over to patreon.com/thegaytheistmanifesto to become a part of this movement and support the show. Thank you. And welcome back to the Gay Theist Manifesto. We've got an awesome episode on tap here. Today we're having a discussion about sex and sexuality as queer and trans people. As I said in the intro, this is going to be a very frank, open, honest discussion about sexuality and the way that we express our sexuality and the way we share intimacy with our partners. So the explicit tag is on the episode for a reason. If this is something that makes you uncomfortable or you feel might make you uncomfortable, maybe skip the episode. I don't want to make anyone uncomfortable or hurt anyone, but I think this is an important thing because so often sexuality for queer and trans people is kind of the punchline, right? It's the butt of jokes, or the butt of laughing conversations about, well, how do trans people have sex when they haven't had surgeries or anything like that. So the idea here is to just sort of demystify and humanize sexuality for queer and trans folks. And before we jump in here, I do want to make something clear. One perspective you will not hear in this discussion is from anyone who identifies as asexual or demisexual. And to give a quick overview of that, basically, asexual can mean that someone has no sexual interest at all. It can mean that they only have sexual interest tied to romantic interests. And there's a whole sort of spectrum along those lines. You're not going to hear anyone on the panel here who identifies on that spectrum, but I did want it to be acknowledged that those people do exist and they are part of our community. I think the topic is probably too broad to fit into this discussion. And just know that if there's anyone out there interested in those issues or who identifies that way, we are not forgetting about you. We are not excluding you or erasing you. I think asexuality is a topic that deserves its own episode, and it absolutely will get one sooner than later. I just wanted to put that out there. I have a panel of people who are friends of mine who represent pretty diverse points of view in the queer and trans community that have agreed to have this open, honest discussion with us here. So, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our panel. Obviously, I'm Callie. I'm the host of the show, so hopefully you know me by now. My pronouns are she, her, hers, which you should also probably know. I am a binary identified trans woman. I am also, I just sort of like to say queer at this point, because I've found myself attracted to various different, expressions of gender, not just male or female, but, also non-binary. So I just kind of use the word queer to describe myself. Ari, do you want to go next?
I'm Ari. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. As far as gender goes, I identify as transgender, genderqueer / non-binary, and I identify myself as pansexual.
Cool. And John?
Hi, my pronouns are he, him, and his. I generally identify as bisexual. It's an easier label for most people, and I found that, for instance, the label pansexual would be more accurate because I also am open to having trans romantic and sexual partners. But most people that I come to, at least people who are, straight and cis, and they're not very educated on the LGBT community, they have no idea what the hell pansexual is. So saying that, it confuses them. And the whole idea of labels is, we use these as an attempt to be efficient. We're trying to convey more information in a shorter amount of time. But if the context for that label is not understood by the person, then instead of enhancing and easing conversation, using the label actually makes it harder to understand and have dialogue. So I usually just use bisexual, even though it's not technically accurate.
Okay, fair enough. And Nat?
Hi, I'm Nat. My pronouns are she, hers, her. I identify as a cisgendered, pansexual, polyamorous person. So I've just kind of come into that label a few years ago. So I've been exploring for a few years now.
Very cool, very cool. So what I want to kind of do is just sort of tell the story of why I thought this episode would be a good thing to do. I recently just, as you heard in the last episode, the good news episode, I have a girlfriend now. Her name is Celeste, and she's amazing. And so I'm actually kind of navigating relationships as a trans person and sexuality as a trans person kind of for the first time. She's not the only person that I've had any sort of sexual encounter with, but she's the first in a sustained relationship. And sustained relationship. And the first time that we started to get intimate, I thought it was really interesting how things unfolded, because immediately my thoughts were, okay, we need to have a talk about boundaries, but holy crap, that's really unsexy. But it's really important because, at that point we didn't know each other super, super well yet. So, we hadn't had the time to have those conversations outside of that context. So as we were getting intimate and getting handsy with each other and, things were escalating, I just came out and said it. I said, hey, are there any boundaries? Or, is there any place that you don't go, or that, any part of your body that's uncomfortable being touched? And And she said she didn't know. And I said, yeah, I don't really know either. And it was really interesting to me how we could have that discussion, that seemingly very unsexy discussion about boundaries, without it ruining the moment. And the night ended up being incredible. So my thought was to just sort of demystify this whole thing. Has anyone else on the panel had that kind of experience, as when you come out and you start exploring your sexuality and you finally embrace, well, maybe I'm not straight and maybe I need to explore that. Has anyone else had any kind of similar stories like that?
Yes.
Let's hear it.
Well, I don't date straight men anymore. I'm kind of over that. I've dated a lot of straight men who were really closeted, and it's just uncomfortable for me to be with people who aren't sure about themselves anymore. So I'd like to be with people who at least have an idea, that they like to experiment, and also other people who understand what it's like to be a little queer. So I've been with my current primary boyfriend for over a year now, and when we got together, it was just like up front, like he's like, I'm bisexual, I like being with men, and that was fine with me. But it's like when I've dated other men who are bisexual, it's like, or who are questioning, or I think they call it like hetero-flexible now.
Right. Yeah. I've
like, what are their boundaries? Like, what can, we do? Or like if we're in multiple partner play, like what are those boundaries too? Because I'm poly, and because, me and my partner like to be with other people in a group setting, a lot of those things come into play. I think you find that the people who are most successful at having multiple relationships, or with group sex or anything like that, tend to be extremely, I don't want to say mature, because it sounds like it's like denigrating to other people, but they tend to have a lot more experience with relationships and tend to be open in a communicative way more than other people, because I think that
I think it's kind of about being being very well versed in your own sexuality, as opposed to just seeing sex as like, well, I'm a guy, I have sex with girls, so let's do that. Like, people who've actually had a deep exploration of their own sexuality. I think that's kind of what you're getting at. Yeah.
Yeah, and then, it's difficult to be with people who have closeted parts of themselves, that there's things that they don't even understand about themselves that they don't necessarily want to. Or when you begin to explore that with them, they kind of clam up. And there's no, like, I'm tired of being, everyone's counselor, who I date. I don't want to be a therapist, right? I want to date you. So that's where I kind of draw my line, is like, I don't want to have to, conduct, psychoanalysis as to why this is a problem for you. Sure. I want to know, up front, like, this is an issue. And then, if they want to explore it, they want to explore it. If they don't, they don't. And then leave it at that. Yeah, but like, being able to talk about it is a level of maturity that is sorely lacking in a lot of relationships. I hate to say it, but
I totally agree. And I'll have a fun story about closeted parts of yourself later. But John, I think you had a story you wanted to share.
Yeah, I did. And I have to preface this with a little bit of it's a bit of a weird story, because it took me so long to understand what was going on with my body and hormones and everything else. I started going through puberty around 11 or 12, which was around the same time that I started, like, consensual childhood same-sex exploration, as some people do. And that was about a year later was when I started being sexually abused by a member of my family. So for a long, long time, there was this weird confusion with me because the same-sex attraction that I started, really noticing by the time I was 16 still felt like it was very tied into the abuse. And then, being raised in a very conservative, religious, barely racist household even, this was not a topic that was broached. My parents never talked to me about sexuality. They left that to the school. I was forced to go to church until I very adamantly left the church around 13. And it ties into my being secular as well. But there was so much frustration and confusion and anger in my teen years that I couldn't figure anything out. And it wasn't until I was 22 that I was really comfortable with the idea of being bisexual or of being something else that was not straight. And 21 is when I finally lost my virginity, and it was horrible, and that's a whole other story. But it wasn't until 22 that I was finally like, okay, I figured all this out now, finally. This is what I am. This makes sense now. You know what I mean?
Sure. And was there kind of an exploration of boundaries like I was talking about before? Like, if you have that first encounter, so do you just let things go and talk about it later, or do you talk about boundaries in the middle of, or how did that play out?
Well, actually, when I say that I lost my virginity at 21, that was my first heterosexual experience.
Gotcha. Okay.
My first homosexual experience was when I was 19 in college, and that was with a friend that I trusted, and a friend that, there was some mutual attraction there, and he was very, I told him a lot of my past and my things, and he was very understanding and supportive, and he was like, throughout my sort of exploration with him, because I was interested, and I basically told him, hey, I want to try some things, I want to work some things out and see what's going on. So we did that, and he was so sweet and so supportive. Like, is this okay? Do you want me to do this? Do you not want me to do that? Et cetera, et cetera. It was it was exactly what I needed to sort of explore around in a safe environment with someone that I trusted and knew, and someone who knew what was going on with me. And that was exactly what I wanted and exactly what I needed, and it was one of the most positive experiences still that I've ever had.
That's amazing. So speaking of first experiences, Ari, we haven't gotten to you yet, but if first of all, if you have a story relevant to the other question about exploration of boundaries and everything, I'd definitely like to hear that. But I also think it'd be interesting if we could all sort of recount the first experience we ever had outside of heteronormative relationship bounds.
Yeah, I don't really have much to say about boundaries, so I'll just skip to the next thing. I guess I'll just go into the whole how I realized that I wasn't a heterosexual girl. I would have considered myself at the time. It was actually, a lot of people talk about going through kind of like a struggle of like questioning and not really knowing and being like, am I gay? Am I straight? Am I bisexual? I don't really understand. For me, I had the complete opposite of experience of that. I always understood myself, but I didn't really have the words to define it. I didn't always understand myself necessarily, but so when I was 15, I realized that I was in love with my best friend, who is female, and who is actually now I consider my queer platonic partner, I guess you could say. So before that, I had always considered myself a straight female. And I remember very clearly just sitting in English class, thinking about her, and then realizing, oh, I guess I'm in love with her. Oh, I guess that means that I'm bisexual? Oh, okay. And I just went on like that from then on. I had no problems with it whatsoever. And I also have I guess, sort of a unique situation because that was when I was 15. I am now 23, almost 24, and I still have not had any kind of sexual contact with a female person. I would like to, but I haven't. So I don't define myself in terms of what I've done. I define myself in terms of my attractions.
Sure. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So if you're comfortable sharing, of course, would you be okay relating kind of the first experience you had after sort of realizing that about yourself? Like, because I would imagine, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, even having, a quote unquote heterosexual relationship with someone, and obviously I use that in quotes because that, denotes gender binary, which is obviously not the case in this situation. But, I would imagine the context changes a little bit after you've realized, like, well, you know what, I'm not exclusively attracted to men, and you know what, I'm not actually either gender. Like, did that change the context of the way that you experienced intimacy after that, even though you were generally with the same kind of partners?
Well, I hadn't experienced any intimacy before that, so I don't really have anything to compare it to.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, I was 15 at the time. I had my first kiss when I was 16, and then my first sexual experience when I was 18.
Gotcha,
so I haven't really known anything else.
Gosh, I kind of envy that, to be honest. For me, it was actually, a lot of times in the queer community and the transgender community, we definitely like to lay down, gender and sexuality describe two completely different things about a person. And for me personally, I wasn't really able to figure out my sexuality until I came to terms with my gender. So I'm definitely not willing to proclaim, like, the link between this thing that so many people deny. But at least for me, there were connections there. And I remember, after sort of coming to terms of, exploring this whole thing, I had a person whose relationship is very, very hard for me to describe. We're not exactly lovers, even though we're very much in love with each other. We're not exactly friends with benefits because we're so much more than that. But she's a person who helped me very much through my transition, and continues to do so today. And we also had a sexual relationship. And the first time we actually had a sexual encounter after I had come to terms with who I was, and I was kind of playing the quote unquote stereotypical female role, it was unreal to me, because it was like, wow, like this, I'm experiencing sex the way that I think people are actually describing it now, because it had never completely and totally felt like that before. And I guess the other dimension to this that's important to know is I'm also very much into kink and BDSM and the dominant submissive dynamic and that kind of stuff. So there was a dimension of that I wasn't able to have anything resembling a satisfying sexual experience until I came to terms with that. And then there was the other dimension of figuring out my gender on top of that. But yeah, so that's it's amazing how perspective changes in that way. Nat, do you have a relevant story to tell about that?
Well, I think, I didn't grow up in a religious household. My parents converted when I was 12, so I had a long time of making up my own way. But when I was about 8 years old, I guess, I watched the original Batman series every day. And I was in love with Catwoman. And all three Catwomen. And right. I didn't know, the difference. And I didn't understand, there wasn't any language for gay in my life. So I didn't really understand that. When I was a little bit older, my mom caught my brother experimenting with other boys, and I was like, oh, that must be wrong. But I had experimented with other girls, when I was young. So, I mean, I never really thought of it as being wrong. I just always had really bad relationships with women, because I always played the, I guess, the stereotypical male role. I like to make girls laugh, and I like being goofy, and, I was always I always thought I was in the friend zone. Like a lot of guys will say,
Right.
I put in the friend zone, a lot of straight dudes, but that's how I positioned myself, is because I only ever saw, heterosexuals in relationships. So, every time I would think about being in a relationship with girls, I was the man. My dad brought me up to be masculine. He made me play sports and do all these things I didn't have any interest in doing, but I was forced into it. So I think that part of that is why I kind of also feel so strongly about, being a part of the queer community and supporting, trans people. But there's that aspect of me that is like, my ability to have relationships with women has been broken for a long time. So part of my sexual exploration, too, is rebuilding that ability and trusting women and being able to let myself be myself around women. I think that a lot of, I'm a nerd, I'm a total dork, so a lot of the guys I've always hung out with at comic shops and stuff like that, they've always been, I've always understood that because I'm like that with women. I'm kind of backwards and I don't understand how to, come on to them and things like that. So I've been having, I actually have a partner and her husband, and me and my boyfriend hang out, and we're really connecting, and that's really healing. I guess a part of that too is that I've always known that I've had an attraction to women, and I've tried to hide it and play normal and stuff like that, but it's partially because it was just a lot easier to have that part of my life kind of broken. So,
Right.
Yeah, dealing with that is not very fun. But
Right.
yeah.
Well, you brought up earlier being polyamorous, and I mentioned being kinky, and Ari mentioned having a queer platonic partner.
Yeah.
Is there anyone on the discussion panel here who is strictly monogamous?
No.
Well, it depends on your definition of monogamy for me.
Fair enough.
Because I have my partner of 5 years who we have a sexual and romantic relationship, and then I also have this queer platonic person who it's not sexual at all, but it's very, very, very close, more than what you would expect for friends, even best friends.
Gotcha. So it's not something you would define as a romantic relationship?
No. It's queer platonic.
Right. Got it. Okay, fair enough. Because, and the reason that I ask is I find, and maybe this is wrong. Maybe this is just me, seeing things and drawing conclusions that aren't really there. But I tend to find that people who are, if you're queer to a certain extent, I feel like generally speaking, you're probably a little bit more sexually realized than the average person, just because your sexuality is something you have to spend so much time thinking about and coming to terms with.
Yes.
And what I find is that, the more and more people are self-realized with sexuality, the more and more likely there are to be other dimensions to their sexuality, like being polyamorous, like being kinky, or other things like that. Does anybody have any sort of observations on that? Does that sound on point, or am I way off base?
I have to agree. It's not. I mean, everybody who gets raised in this, heteronormative, cisnormative, nuclear family unit kind of ideology, and at this point, I have to say it is an ideology, because it's not as common as it once was anymore, and it's when people reject it, when people reject a lot of the facets of the LGBT community in favor of this heterosis normative, nuclear family unit thing. They're really talking about how this idea that they've been brought up with is such a tradition. That's why it's good. So when they don't see it in other people, and when they're looking at LGBT folks and I don't understand how you guys can do that. Like my uncle, he doesn't understand LGBT folks at all, and he doesn't know about my sexuality. So he doesn't get it. But for me, it's having to have figured all of this stuff out is really where I have to agree that LGBT people seem to be more self-realized about all of this, because it's not easy for us, and it's not a given. It's not something that we just, this is how it should be. We have to figure that out, and we have to struggle with it, and sometimes we have to go through some pretty rough things before, things get better for us. So, yeah, I do think we are very more in tune with ourselves, because people take this heteronormative, cisnormative, nuclear thing for such granted that this is the way it is, and almost as if there's some kind of handbook that everyone needs to follow. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Ari, this one's kind of for me and you, being the trans folks on the panel here, but one of the other stories that I kind of wanted to tell that I thought might kind of bring things into focus as far as, how trans people especially experience sexuality, or at least some of us do. Obviously, I can't claim to speak for everyone, but one story, and I've gotten permission from Celeste to share this story because she thinks it's as important as I do. There was a time where, she'd spent the night at my place, and she'd actually kind of woke me up by, getting handsy and trying to get me worked up and aroused and everything like that. And, there are very, very few times when I'm going to refuse that. So I went along and then, kind of in the middle of it, she just stopped, and she started feeling really dysphoric in the middle of this. And, for those who don't know, dysphoria is basically, in terms of trans people, is, the sort of discomfort that we feel where, when our bodies don't match the neural map that our brain has. And, for some people, it makes sex kind of impossible because, that some of us feel that part of our body is just not supposed to be there. And, I would wager to say most trans folks probably fall somewhere in between that. For me, sometimes I'm great with it. Sometimes I'm not. I definitely am pursuing surgery, but in the meantime, I don't have so much dysphoria surrounding my penis that I'm not comfortable using it sexually. And she felt so bad because she's like, well, I woke you up or whatever. And I had to tell her, like, look, this is probably going to happen to me too. We're going to be in the middle of something and all of a sudden I'm just going to get uncomfortable. So like, that's okay. And that's kind of an added dimension to sexuality. I thought that was kind of an important story to tell. Ari, have you had anything similar?
Okay, so on the dysphoria issue, like we were talking about on the last episode, my dysphoria tends to be more social than actual, like thinking my body is wrong. My body is not wrong. It's just the way that people view me when they see my body is wrong for me most of the time. Mm-hmm. So I don't have anything to relate on that end. I don't have any bottom dysphoria. It's more on the top. So I'm trying to think. For me, it's just been, especially when I was first becoming sexually active, it was more just the emotional vulnerability of it. And at the time, I hadn't realized my trans identity. So just because I grew up in an emotionally abusive household, not sexually abusive, so it wasn't anything to do with that, but just for me, especially, sex is a very emotional thing. It's a way to be very, very intimate and really show yourself to your partner and have your partner show yourself to you. Not to be voyeuristic or anything about it, but not
Right.
that kind of show yourself.
Right.
But for me, it was more just being comfortable, just expressing myself in that sort of way and being just so vulnerable with someone else. So it didn't really have to do with my physical appearance so much. Especially just because growing up in America, we're such a oh, you can't show those parts. Those are dirty parts. Those are sexual parts. And no one can see those parts except for you and the person you're going to marry and that kind of thing. Even though I didn't grow up getting a whole lot of religious sexual indoctrination, just growing up in America, you get the whole oh, you're not supposed to see this certain part of a person. So it did even take a little bit of training to start to get over that a little bit.
Right, I hear you. And if I can ask, your current partner is cisgender, right?
Yes.
So was there any, was there a lot of education necessary in that, or was he already pretty well culturally competent when you met, or how did that whole thing work?
When we met in high school and then we started dating, when I was in my first year of college, he was in his second, and at the time I didn't really know about I knew that to put it this way, I didn't have the language to describe my identity, so I was just kind of going along with being a cisgender girl or woman or whatever. Right. So we've had a really interesting journey together on this whole issue. We were together for 2 years before I came across the word genderqueer for the first time and started realizing that was, something for me. He doesn't really, I'm still the same person, so it doesn't really matter to him what kind of label I want to use for myself. The only thing that he's concerned about is that he identifies as straight and he's not really attracted to masculine people at all. So the only thing is he is a little bit apprehensive about me going quote unquote too far with testosterone. Gotcha. I mean, we've talked about it extensively, and we've, I think, kind of reached a middle ground on it. But, other than that, it's all good. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, and the reason that I ask is because I remember, obviously, I talked a little bit earlier about the first sexual encounter I had after realizing who I was, and then the first sexual encounter I had after I started hormones. And
hormones.
Hormones indeed.
I am currently going through male puberty, so it is fun times for me.
Right. Well, and you're still pretty early on, right? Like 2 months?
Yeah.
So the first time I had any kind of sexual experience after hormones, I'd already been on hormones for 6 or 8 months at that point. And I was really, really curious how my body was going to react. And for all intents and purposes, I was in kind of a new body at that point. And, I masturbate just like most folks do. But, obviously that and a sexual experience with another person, at least for me, are nowhere near the same thing. So I was really, really unsure what to expect. And it was amazing to me how different it felt when, when she would touch my breasts and touch my nipples, and and it just kind of, and as much as I hate playing into stereotypes, like sort of doing the stereotypical things that you do, quote unquote, to women during sex, it was amazing to me. And then, the kink aspect of it, because she's a BDSM partner of mine. And, that whole thing started coming into play, and she brought rope to the encounter, and just holy crap.
Nice.
I almost passed out.
Oh my God.
And it got to the point, when we were in the midst of this encounter, like, I really like being slapped and in sexual play. And things were getting really intense, and I actually lost it, and I started crying, like sobbing my eyes out. and it wasn't because anything was like too much. It was sensory overload because of, all of the changes that my body had gone through. And I ended up just kind of like collapsing in her arms, and she's like, "Oh my God, did I do something wrong? Did I hurt you?" And I'm like, "No, I'm okay."
I'm so happy.
This is amazing. Oh, God. John, you unmuted yourself a second ago. It sounded like you had something to say.
Yeah, no, but sorry, I didn't mean to butt in, but
oh, you're fine.
I'm also very interested in exploring BDSM as well. I'm very new to that concept, so I just threw in a little quip when you said that your partner brought the rope out. It was just like, nice, because that's something that I want to try as well. So I'm learning a whole lot of stuff that is very interesting to me.
Yeah, well, it's a lot of fun if it's a thing that you're into. I definitely understand why certain people aren't, but it's kind of hard for me to have satisfying sexual experiences without some kind of dominant or submissive dynamic. It doesn't necessarily have to be, bring out the whips and chains and ball gags and stuff like that, although those things are fun. It doesn't have to necessarily be that. There just has to be some sort of, dominant submissive dynamic. So what about you, Nat? Is there anything, any sort of other dimension to your sexuality? Like, you mentioned being polyamorous. Is there any other kind of stuff like that, fetish or anything like that you're into that kind of is informed by being queer at all?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. My first boyfriend, my first sexual experience, we experimented all day, all night. And it was, I didn't realize until I got older. I mean, I'm in my 30s. I might be the oldest person in this discussion, but...
You might. I'm 31.
Yeah, I'm 33.
Okay, yeah.
But I didn't realize what a gift that was to be able to experiment sexually and to try on different roles. And, there was the dominant submissive stuff. There was pet play. There was all kinds of things. I've always been experimental with anal play and pegging and all of that. So I had a few relationships that were very sexually limiting because I was like, I'm in love with this person, so I'll do what they're comfortable with. And I realized, as I got older, that making those sacrifices because you believe you love someone is not worth it in the end. You have to be loved completely, and you have to love another person or completely, no matter if it lasts forever or for a few days. That you have to have your relationship. If you're not completely open, about those things, about wanting to experiment or anything like that, you're not going to be happy in the long run. I know a lot of people who are bisexual get into heterosexual relationships or marriages, and, later on it just like picks at them. They want to have these experiences with other people, and not necessarily to have relationships or anything, but they want to explore that aspect of their lives and are shamed away from it or sacrifice that for what they see as the common good. I've been one of those people. But I also decided after I got divorced or separated, I'm not going to hold back anymore. I'm not going to sacrifice myself and, part of what makes me happy for someone else. So I explored polyamory. I explored fetish and, those things, the things that I had done earlier in my sexual experience that I kind of shut away in a box under the bed, and I brought them back out. And I realized there were so many things that I enjoyed and I'd fantasized about for a long time, and I didn't let myself enjoy them or fantasize about them anymore. And that became to the forefront. Like, my partner right now, we're with each other in the most open way. Like, everything is like I call it the flayed man. We're flayed open to each other.
Yeah.
I don't have anything that I would ever hide from him. If I killed someone tomorrow or, kicked a puppy, I would never hide that from him. I would never, artfully dodge, any of those things. So I think that is the most important aspect of any relationship, especially a sexual relationship, is that you never sacrifice what you want, but also remain respectful to the other person. That's communication. That's just the bottom line of communication.
Absolutely.
It's having respect for someone else and getting it back, and exploring. If you want to explore with someone else, find someone else who wants to explore. Do not be with someone who doesn't want to. That's the big thing. And that's also, what I think that polyamory does for me and my partner, too. He's had same-sex, queer, straight, sexual relationships, friendships that have benefits. And I have too. And we've had them together with other people, and we've had them apart. Like, I am seeing someone right now by myself who is mostly straight man. And I say that because he's into exploring, but that's not like the biggest part of our relationship. We explore other things, and we're just kind of having fun making out. That's my big thing. I kind of skipped that part of my life. I wasn't really a teenager. I didn't just make out with people. It was like, okay, we're kissing for 5 minutes. Let's have sex. So we'll spend a couple hours just making out. And I'm exploring that part of myself. That's also a part of your sexuality and a part of the human experience. Having kind of an innocent, puppy love thing where you don't just start grinding on each other right away.
No, I agree. I mean, go ahead, John.
Yeah, I just want to add one thing real quick before we change the subject to something else. I really respect a lot of the things you guys are saying, and some of the stuff you're saying is really interesting to me. Also, I'm trying to figure out a lot of the things where I am at in my life as certain sexual practices are going to pertain to my disability, and that's also one of the things where I think it makes certain things way more difficult, and it also makes, let's be honest, it also makes a lot of potential partners a little hesitant, and that I've had some well-meaning people tell me some pretty stupid things as far as them not wanting to hurt me, or I've had people, I've had a few men offer to do things. Oh, I can carry you around and stuff. What? But there's a certain frustration that I'm experiencing where there are all these things that I want to experience and all these things that I want to try, but the disability kind of makes that more difficult, and it makes certain things that would be very easy for, say, one of you guys, that is not easy for me at all. So there's also that.
Are you comfortable going into the details of your disability for context?
Yeah, sure. I have no problem with that. I was born with cerebral palsy. I think I remember the specific type is, I think it's called spastic diplegic cerebral palsy. And basically what that means is that I have a great deal of what they call spastic muscle tension in my right arm and hand, which, I basically do everything left-handed. My left hand and arm are not affected, but the right is. And it, for instance, I can't put my right arm behind my back. It's like a reflex. It's like those reflex testers where they tap you on the knee and your leg goes out. Mm-hmm. Kind of like that. But the the muscles. There's a lot of tension there, which restricts hand strength and fine motor control and range of motion and things like that. As far as my legs, I can use my legs. They're skinnier than everyone else's. My legs are a lot weaker than everyone else's. I walk around in a walker. If I'm doing long distances, I have a little electric scooter I use. But that, and as it pertains to, trying to get partners and getting to know people, a lot of people look at me basically as like a fragile person that, they're going to hurt me or something like that. But I can tell that some of these people mean well, but it's still entirely condescending and they're not trying to be disrespectful, but they are. It's like somebody not realizing that they've said something racist, you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, and I have to admit that I think, if I met someone who I really liked who had any kind of disability, I don't think that would be a factor for me. But, I have to admit that I might end up having that same sort of kind of like maternalistic attitude. Like, well, now, because you have a disability, all of a sudden I feel like I have to take care of you. And that, I have to walk on eggshells and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that you bring that up because, I can think, well, if I was in that position, I don't think I wouldn't like being treated that way. But when I think to myself, well, how would I react in that situation? I would think, part of me might do the same.
Right.
So, so that's. Yeah, so that's been a pretty big obstacle for you as far as, dating and sexuality and that kind of thing?
By far, my single biggest obstacle of my entire life. And it's interesting how you said that you might end up sort of thinking those same kind of things too. A lot of people do. And I think the solution to that, as the solution would be to a lot of things, is just to communicate and talk it out and figure out what's going on with this and what's okay and what's not okay. But see, and the thing is that a lot of people don't do that. So when I'm talking to people on dating websites or whatever, a lot of the time when they find out that I'm disabled, it's an immediate turnoff for them. And they have said things like, well, I wouldn't want to have to take care of you. It's like they make that assumption because they don't communicate with me, and then I end up getting pissed off. Well, who the hell said you had to take care of me? I live alone. I take care of myself. What the hell are you talking about? You know what I mean? So they're always very surprised, like, oh wow, oh god, I didn't know. Well, yeah, of course you didn't know. That's why I'm telling you. But you didn't even ask. You didn't even attempt a dialogue. You know what I mean?
Yeah. God, that has to be so frustrating.
Yeah, it really is. It really is.
That brings up something else, too, is that in terms of sexuality, there are a lot of, I guess they call it sexual dysfunction or sexual individuality and biological uniqueness that everyone has that, we're so attuned to pornography and how people behave in pornography that, a lot of women I know can't orgasm. There are a lot of men I know can't orgasm or do so rarely or can't hold an erection or have abnormal looking compared to porn genitalia and things like that. And we get really self-conscious about that too. And I've been with people who are incredibly worried, and it's such an anxiety for them that it causes them to have dysfunction in some way because they feel abnormal. And there's such a pressure on people to be this standard that I think the porn industry is kind of set for a lot of people.
Exactly. Yeah, my first time with a woman, my first heterosexual experience, basically left me thinking that I was broken, that I didn't work right, and it took me another few years to figure out, no, I'm fine. It was just, that was a really, really bad experience, which is why things didn't go the way that I wanted them to.
Yeah, and actually, Nat, you bring up a really good point of discussion, because as a trans person, I have somewhat of a love-hate relationship with my genitalia. I mean, I am actively seeking surgery to have it reconstructed into something it's not, and so, there are times when I'm 100% okay, like, well, it's what I have, so I'm going to use it because, I can still feel pleasure and I can still have orgasms and things like that. But the other thing is that hormones really affect that, and hormones make it really hard, have made it very hard for me to stay erect, and for me to, if someone doesn't know exactly the right way to do things, it's very, very hard for me to orgasm if I'm not masturbating. And so you brought up porn as kind of setting those unrealistic expectations. I guess it only kind of makes sense to have a discussion about porn in the context of sexuality, especially when it comes to queer and trans issues, because I don't think either queer or trans people are represented well in porn at all.
No, they aren't. And another thing too is that we kind of look at sex as having this endpoint, right? You go from the foreplay and you go to the orgasm, and that's just how society has pictured the sexual experience. When I guarantee you, like, at least from a female perspective, that it's not all about the end game, and that there's so much more to it than that. And then it's the most frustrating thing in the world to start to have feelings for someone and really like them, and then they have this concept of sex as being like a production, that it goes from point A to B, and that's what it is. And if I don't have an orgasm, they've failed. And that is incredibly frustrating because, at least for me, the whole process is wonderful and is pleasurable. The mistakes and things like that. And we, as a society, don't talk about that. We don't talk about, like, the embarrassing stuff that happens that you laugh off, or, that, no, I did not come. I didn't, and it's okay. And,
right.
A lot, especially straight men, are extremely upset when they can't make a woman have an orgasm. And it's like, honey, you're going to win quite a few medals if you, can make me come this time, because biologically,
right,
I can't do it at this moment. And they do not believe that, because women in porn come on demand.
Yeah, well, I can think of, two of the most satisfying sexual experiences I've ever had nothing to do with me having an orgasm. One was the story that I told earlier, where I ended up just collapsing in my partner's arms, crying my eyes out because of how intense the experience was. But I left that feeling such a deep sense of satisfaction. And the other one is, I really, really enjoy oral sex. I almost enjoy giving it more than I enjoy receiving it. And that's, whether there's a penis or a vagina involved, does not really seem to make a difference for me. And, the first time I ever gave oral sex to someone with a penis, I was like, after it was over with, I was done. Like, I was just ready to be like, cool, let's cuddle and talk and we can go to sleep later. I was good with that.
I totally understand that.
The other person was so worried about reciprocating. And it wasn't, it wasn't a pride thing. It was a like, you gave me this amazing experience. I don't want you to feel like you didn't get anything out of it. And I was like, honey, listen, you have no idea how satisfied I am right now. Like, I'm good.
That's like a huge issue I run into over and over again. And I feel like it's very sad. That's like the saddest part of our culture, is that there's this rush to get to the finish line, and especially with sex, and being a woman, it's like, saying that I enjoy giving a blowjob, or I enjoy going down on someone. To say that, and it's not really seen as being true, because it's seen as like a chore, right?
Right.
It's like, no, if I get off on, giving pleasure, just as like you do to me, right? And it's really sad when people have a hard time with that.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say that what you both are talking about, especially what Callie was saying, that is exactly how mainstream porn, which I don't watch, by the way, because it disgusts me, and I know nobody is enjoying it, and not only do the women have to come on demand, but so do the men. There's literally like a timing thing where it's like, okay, I need you to come right now because this is the money shot. And this is how porn hurts men. Because and not only does it hurt women, of course, absolutely it does, but it also hurts men because it gives you such an unhealthy and such an unrealistic expectation about what it's supposed to be and what you're supposed to do and how it's supposed to be like for you, which is a huge part of why my first time with a woman was so, it was damaging to me. It was not fun at all.
Well, let me play devil's advocate here for a moment. And this is not me defending the mainstream porn industry by any stretch of the imagination, because there are a myriad of problematic things in it for men and women both, as you said, and most especially for queer and trans people, because at best trans people are a punchline in the porn industry. Yeah. I will say, I think, and so here's the problem, right? Because our culture is so against talking about sex and sexuality. For so many people, porn is your first exposure to that, right? Yep. And of course, that can cause unrealistic expectations. But I think looking at it from the other side and recognizing that porn is fantasy and that it's not a representation of how sex is actually supposed to be, I think that one can have a healthy relationship with porn in that context, recognizing that what you're seeing is not realistic and that it's fantasy. And the reason that I say that is because, especially when it comes to BDSM porn, because that was kind of, there was a show on HBO years and years and years ago called Real Sex. And I remember being like 14 or 15 years old at my aunt's house, and she had HBO, and I happened to come across this, and they were doing a show about BDSM, and that was kind of how I found out that it was a thing, and I saw these things, and I was like, wow, because I had realized, when you play those games as a kid, play cops and robbers, I was like, I was always the one volunteering to be handcuffed, you know what I mean? And it was like, man, I kind of enjoy that more than most people do, I think, so that was kind of what helped me realize that about myself. And I mean, I almost had as much of, trouble coming to terms with being kinky and being into BDSM and that kind of stuff as I did with my gender and sexuality. So, recognizing, of course, that porn is fantasy, I think it is possible to have a healthy relationship with it in that way. I would lay more of the blame on our culture's attitude towards sex and the fact that so many of us, our first and only experience to sexuality is porn, as opposed to it being this supplemental fantasy thing that goes along with sexuality. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I agree.
Yeah, definitely agree.
Ara, we haven't heard from you in a while. Do you have any thoughts here?
Porn. Yeah, I mean, I've never really been a big porn watcher, so I think most of my sort of indoctrination, if you want to call that, it was probably from TV and movies and even fan fiction and stuff like that. Going into my first sexual experience, I kind of had this idea that, okay, he's going to stick it in and then it's going to bleed a little bit and then it's going to be awesome and amazing. And it wasn't.
Right.
It was really painful because I was really like nervous. I was like, what is going on? I've never done this before. And it was also his first sexual experience as well. So neither of us really knew what we were doing. And we were like, this is what sex is? Like, we would rather just masturbate forever than do this again.
Right.
So it took us quite a while, like several months, just to like realize that it doesn't just like magically happen. Like you have to work to communicate with your partner and tell your partner what you would like them to do and what you feel comfortable with, and vice versa. It's not just like, okay, the penis goes in vagina and then boom, boom, sexy time.
Well, right. And I think that's the thing that gets so lost. You know, I mean, what we're talking about porn and how it can be unhealthy in that way is it sort of sets that expectation, because, I mean, imagine watching porn and all of a sudden in the middle of it, you know, the two people involved start talking about boundaries. Like, I don't want to watch that. That's not sexy, you know? So like,
yeah, no, there's never any talking. At least, I mean, I don't watch a lot of porn, so I don't really know, but from what I've seen, it's never like, oh, do you want me to do this? Would you mind doing this? That kind of thing. It's like moaning or dirty talk, basically, or silence.
Well, right. And it's, you know, all of a sudden, whatever the thing is that starts happening is the hottest thing in the world, somehow, with no communication having happened to figure out, you know, what the other person is into. So I mean, I really think it can kind of set unrealistic expectations in that way. But holy shit, does it get better once you finally realize that that's a thing that you can do. Like, you know, when someone's doing something, you know, you kind of set your pride aside for a second, and like, you know, if I'm doing something and my partner asks me to adjust it somehow, like, that's not a knock on me. Like, I'm not the one in their body experiencing what they are. How the hell would I know unless they tell me?
You're doing it wrong.
Right.
I remember this moment when I was 18, and it was ridiculous. Like, I was first exposed to porn at maybe 12 or 13. And for a while that did guide a lot of my thoughts and expectations and everything. But I remember there was this one moment when there was the first year that I was in college, and I was watching this like professionally produced like porn masturbation scene, and then I realized that at some point they had put like fake lubricant or something in order not even to ease the process of this woman masturbating, but just to make it look like that she was aroused enough to be enjoying it the way that she was pretending to. And I realized that they literally put like some fake goop around her fingers, and it was like, what? None of this is real.
Right.
And it blew my mind.
Yeah, well, and I remember, you know, one of the, I mean, it may have been the first or second partner I had was a person who was not very vocal during any kind of sexual encounter. And I remember thinking, like, they must not be having fun. Like, because, you know, and obviously, you know, when I say first or second, I mean, I was like 16, 17 at this point. So it was like, you know, she was at my house, which was my parents' house, or I was at her house, which was her parents' house. So it's like, obviously there's some degree where you kind of have to stay quiet so you don't get caught. But like, even in situations where we knew we weren't going to get caught, you know, she was just very, very quiet. And I remember thinking to myself, like, you know, there's no way that she's having fun right now, but there's also no way that I can stop and ask, because that would be way unsexy. And, you know, and then eventually, you know, when she would orgasm, you know, her body would shudder a little bit and she would kind of moan a little bit, and that would be the end of it. And because I was so unable to communicate because of those unrealistic expectations, like, I just kept thinking, like, I must be a terrible sexual partner, you know, whether it came to intercourse or oral sex or, you know, mutual masturbation or anything like that. Like, I must just be terrible at this. And then eventually I had the conversation and she was like, oh no, like, I'm not a very vocal person. Some people just aren't. And I was like, oh wow, really? You know, because I am a very vocal person. So yeah, it's crazy how how important communication is and how little it happens, and people just go based on assumptions and they never have those communications. And I think isn't that so much of the root of the problem in almost any relationship, is people just not communicating with one another?
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely.
Well, this has been a really, really awesome conversation, and we could probably go for 5 or 6 more hours, but, this is a podcast and I do like to keep it under about an hour and a half if I can. And we're just over an hour here. So, what I'd like to do, if I could, is just kind of go around the panel and see, if there's anything that we haven't talked about that you think is important to know, either to dispel a myth, or, if there's a certain story that you want to tell that illustrates a certain point or anything like that. Nat, why don't we start with you?
Well, I guess I would probably say that for anyone listening who feels any kind of inadequacy or self-consciousness about themselves sexually, that the greatest gift they could ever give themselves is to feel comfortable with that part of themselves by themselves first, and to kind of just accept that there are going to be bumps along the road and that they have to work that out. And, sexually, you have to work that out with other partners too. You don't know what you like till you try it. If something is horrifying and you don't want to do it, you don't have to do it. You don't have to try it just to try it. But if there are things that you're curious about and, interest you, explore it. Find someone safe that you can do those things with. If you can't find that person, keep looking. But your priority is yourself and your own safety and your own pleasure. And don't sacrifice that for anybody else.
I think that's solid advice. John, what about you?
Well, I wish that I could have myself as I am now, to have been my older brother growing up. Because I wish I had known all of these things that I know now, that if I had someone who would have told me then, it would have really made a lot of my whole life a lot easier. Like I said, being raised in a very conservative religious household where there was abuse going on, I was reinforced with such unhealthy, negative, sex negative, anti-LGBT ideologies that it took me years and years to deprogram my mind, and then, oh no, this is actually okay that I'm also attracted to men. That's fine, actually. It's okay that I like this or that. And because for the longest time it was like, no, this is not okay. Everything that I have ever been taught tells me that this is not okay and that I shouldn't like this, and I'm crazy and I'm broken and no one's ever going to love me, and it's terrible. And that was what, my teenage years were like. And I just wish somebody had just been able to realize what I was going through and see what I was inundated with, and just say, no, you know what? All of that you were taught, that was bullshit. And it's actually okay. Whatever you like, the things that you feel in your heart and in your mind, it's okay to do that. That's what I wish I had growing up.
Yeah, I think that's super important. I'm very fond of saying, when it comes to sex, there are 2 things that matter. One is consent, and the other is honesty.
Yes.
Aside from that, who cares? Do what you're into, and I'm there's not a lot that I'm not into, if we're going to go there, but there are definitely certain fetishes or things that people have that I don't necessarily understand. And why do I have to? You know what I mean? If that's your thing, go for it. Ari, what about you?
I would just recommend that if people want to learn more about sexy stuff, that they listen to the podcast Secular Sexuality with Daryl Ray. It is absolutely wonderful. I before I started listening to it, I was like, oh, I'm a progressive, queer, free thinking person. What more do I have to learn about sex and sexuality? It turns out so much.
Yes.
So,
that show had that same effect on me.
Yes, absolutely. It's just really opened my eyes to all sorts of different relationship dynamics, and the amount of, even if you're not raised with like explicit religious teachings about sex, like you will not have sex until you're married, you will always be in a heterosexual relationship, no kissing until you're 57 years old, that kind of thing. Even if you don't grow up with that, it's amazing how much of that kind of mentality can seep into you, just from being in the American Protestant culture that we live in. And I definitely learned from that podcast a lot about, especially negotiating relationships, which is not a thing that I was familiar with before. I think is an excellent tool for anyone to know. And I think that it's advisable for everyone to kind of, don't just assume, that your partner knows exactly what you want, or that, if you do these certain steps that everyone else does in a relationship, then you will be happy and be in a happy relationship and your partner will be happy. Life is it's different for everyone. Just don't be afraid to set up your relationships in a way that works for you. And don't feel like if you're not in like a monogamous relationship, or if you don't want any relationship, that's fine. Just basically seconding what Johnny was saying. Just feel free to be yourself and do what feels best for you.
Yes,
that's solid advice. And for my piece, I was actually going to bring up secular sexuality too, because Daryl Ray is awesome, and it's a really great podcast, also on Secular Media Network, by the way.
Plug.
Right. One of the most valuable things that I think I've learned from Daryl Ray and that podcast is that there are so many people who, when they leave religion behind, don't realize that their attitudes about sex and sexuality are still informed by religion. And, that goes for, people who force themselves into monogamous relationships when that's not something that they're comfortable with, or, people who force themselves into vanilla sexual relationships. Vanilla being, just sex and no, kinkiness or fetishes or anything like that, which obviously if that's the way that you enjoy sex, there's nothing wrong with that. But there are lots of people who force themselves into that kind of sexual experience when that's not what they really want or what they really need, because they feel wrong about wanting those other things. And that was me for a very long time. And, that kind of thinking helped me realize that I'm poly. I'm not, strict monogamy is not a thing that really makes a lot of sense to me. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with arranging your relationships that way. If that's how you feel you need to arrange your relationships, it's absolutely not a judgment on anyone else. But that's how I figured out that wasn't right for me. So, for me, I would say just, examine the things that you think are the questions that you're past. You think you're past all of these questions, and these things become assumed about you and who you are as a person, who you are sexually. Don't be afraid to go back and revisit those things, because you might be surprised at what you find. I have, romantic relationships with two people. One is not a person that I can really talk much about, but one is obviously Celeste. And one of the conversations that I had with her when we first started is like, look, I have realized that I'm okay with having romantic and sexual feelings for more than one person. And, I'm okay with that. The only reason that I thought that was a bad thing was because I thought I was supposed to feel that way, not because I actually felt that way. And I would say, whenever anyone runs up against those sorts of feelings and boundaries, I would say, examine those. Ask yourself why this is a thing that you feel is wrong. And if the only thing that you can come up with is because you're supposed to feel that way, maybe dig a little deeper and see if maybe you're not rediscovering a part of yourself. Well, so again, panel, thank you so much for being open and honest and vulnerable here. Not something that should be hard to talk about, but sometimes it can be because of the society that we live in. So I definitely salute everyone on the show here for being so open and honest, and I salute our audience for wanting to open up and hear these conversations. So that, my friends, is going to do it for this episode of the Gaytheist Manifesto on Secular Media Network. I again want to thank my panel. John, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm really glad to have been here. This was really great.
Nat, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you again, Callie.
And brand new co-host, all around badass, Ari Coleman. Thank you for joining us. And I'm so stoked to see what we're going to do together on this show.
Thank you very much. I am too.
You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/The Gaytheist Manifesto. On Twitter, I'm at Gaytheist Callie. The show is at The Gaytheists. You can email us at thegaytheistmanifesto@gmail.com. Ari, do you have a Twitter account?
No, I don't. I'm one of those dinosaurs who only has Facebook.
Oh, God, you're killing me.
Yeah, I know. Just really old-fashioned, I guess.
No, there's nothing wrong with that. I didn't have a Twitter account until we started the show, and I'm kind of bad at Twitter. Before we go, I want you to know that if you're lost, you're hurting, you're scared, if you feel like no one cares and no one understands, you need to know there's a community out here that loves you, cares for you, knows that you're capable of amazing things and that you are worthy of love. If you're struggling, please don't be afraid to reach out. Until next time, friends, this is the Gaytheist Manifesto.